I used to wake up every morning feeling the same heaviness in my chest. The bills piled up like an army marching against me, and every coin felt like a battle I could never win. I lived in that small house my mother left me, the only thing she ever managed to keep after years of struggle. Sometimes I would sit by the window and whisper to her photo, "Mama, I'm trying, but life's been so cruel." I thought she had left this world with nothing but memories, and I had accepted that fate is mine, too. The neighbors pitied me. Some would offer leftovers, others, fake smiles. I learned to live with dignity, even when my stomach growled louder than my pride. I'd spend afternoons sewing old clothes just to sell them at the market, pretending it was enough. Deep down, I believed poverty was my inheritance, the legacy my mother had passed down without choice. But destiny has strange ways of revealing its truth, doesn't it? It was a cold Tuesday morning when everything started to shift. I remember it clearly because I woke up feeling a strange unease, as if someone was calling me from beyond the grave. The kind of feeling you can't explain, only sense. I brewed my weak coffee, wrapped myself in my mother's old shawl, and sat at the kitchen table where we once shared so many quiet mornings. That's when I noticed something unusual about her sewing box. It had always been there, wooden, faded, a little chipped on the corners. But that morning, the light from the window hit it differently, revealing a faint scratch that looked like an engraving. My curiosity got the best of me. I opened the box and found, beneath old needles and threads, a folded yellow envelope. It had my name on it, written in my mother's handwriting. My hands trembled. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming. Inside, there was no money, only a note that said, "If you're reading this, follow the key." And there it was, taped to the back of the letter, a small, rusty key. I turned the tiny key in my fingers, feeling its cold metal bite against my skin. It was old, the kind of key that belonged to something forgotten. I stared at it for minutes, unsure whether to laugh or cry. My mother was a quiet woman, secretive even in her kindness. She never spoke of savings, never hinted at hidden things. If she'd left me this key, it had to mean something more than a locked drawer or a dusty box. That night, I barely slept. The sound of the wind rattling the windows reminded me of her whispers, those she used to murmur when she thought I was asleep. I kept asking myself, what could she have hidden from me? The next morning, I began searching every corner of the house. I opened every drawer, moved every piece of furniture, and even checked under the floorboards in her old room. Nothing. Just dust and silence. Then, around midday, when the sun lit the hallway in that golden tone she always loved, I noticed something. Behind the frame of her wedding picture, there was a small indentation in the wall. It wasn't visible unless the light hit it just right. I pulled the picture down, and my heart raced. There was a small metal lock embedded into the wall, the kind used for safes. My hands trembled as I inserted the key. It fit perfectly. The lock clicked open with a soft sound, like a whisper from another world. Inside the hidden compartment, there was a small notebook, a few letters, and an old photograph of my mother standing beside a man I had never seen before. The moment I touched that photograph, I felt something shift inside me, as if my entire life had been built on a half-told story. I sat on the floor, notebook trembling in my hands. The first page was dated 1968, years before I was born. The handwriting was unmistakably hers. And on that page, she had written one sentence that would change everything I thought I knew about her and about myself. For the day my daughter learns the truth about the money I never touched. The paper smelled of time, that fragile scent of something sacred, something waiting to be remembered. I turned the first few pages slowly, afraid they might crumble under my touch. Each line was written with care, as if my mother had been speaking to me across the decades. She wrote about her youth, her struggles, and a man she called Mr. H, a name I had never heard in my life. At first, I thought it was some innocent memory, perhaps an old friend or a distant relative. But the tone of her words told another story. She described him as a man who changed her fate forever. She wrote that he owned a company in town, a bank, of all things, and that he had offered her a job when she was desperate for work. My mother was barely 21 at the time, living alone after my grandfather passed away. As I read on, my heart sank. She confessed that Mr. A had been married, yet they shared something more than friendship. Their connection was deep, dangerous, and forbidden. She mentioned a moment when she almost left town because of it, and then a line that froze my breath. He said he'd take care of me and the child if I kept silent. The child. Could that mean me? My head started spinning. I could almost hear her voice, calm, loving, trembling with regret. All my life, I had believed my father was a simple worker who died before I turned 5. But here, in her own handwriting, was proof that there was another man, another truth buried beneath decades of silence. Tears blurred my eyes as I flipped to the last pages. There, between the faded ink and smudged tears, I found a reference, an address scribbled in the margins, followed by 3 words that made my pulse stop. Bank account, St. Mary's. The next morning, I stood in front of St. Mary's Bank, an old, stone building that looked like it had been frozen in time. I'd passed by it hundreds of times before, never imagining it held any connection to me. The sign was faded, the windows tall and serious, like silent witnesses of forgotten stories. I hesitated before walking in, clutching my mother's notebook tightly against my chest. My heart pounded with the rhythm of uncertainty. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and polished wood. A young teller smiled politely and asked how she could help me. I showed her the photograph of my mother and whispered, I believe she might have had an account here a long time ago. The teller's expression changed slightly, a flicker of confusion, maybe recognition, and she asked for a moment. She disappeared into a back office, leaving me with the echo of my own heartbeat. Minutes passed like hours. When she returned, she wasn't alone. An older man followed behind her, his posture straight, his gaze sharp, the kind of man who's seen more secrets than he'll ever admit. "Ma'am," he said gently, "may I ask your mother's name again?" I repeated it, my voice trembling. He nodded, then disappeared into another room. When he came back, he held a small, dust-covered ledger in his hands. He placed it carefully on the counter and said, "We haven't touched this file in over 30 years. My breath caught. He opened the ledger, and there it was, my mother's name, written in ink, neat and certain. Beneath it, a note that read, "Account locked, to be released only upon verified confirmation of inheritance." My fingers went numb. Inheritance. I whispered. The man nodded slowly. "Your mother left something here, something she never claimed." And before I could ask another word, he added quietly, "But this isn't the kind of account you think it is." The old banker led me to a small office behind the counter, where the air felt thick with age and secrets. He closed the blinds halfway, leaving only thin stripes of light cutting through the dust. "Your mother was a cautious woman," he said softly, unlocking a metal cabinet. "She came here many times, but never withdrew a cent. She said the money wasn't hers to touch." His words sent a chill down my spine. He pulled out a sealed envelope marked with my mother's handwriting. My knees weakened when I saw my name on it, the same curved letters from the note I'd found in the sewing box. "We were instructed to release this only to her next of kin," he explained. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were several bank documents and one single key, golden this time, small but heavy. At first glance, it seemed like a safe deposit key. I asked where it belonged, and he nodded toward a hallway. "Follow me," he said. My heart raced as we entered the vault area, rows of steel boxes lined up like soldiers of memory. The metallic scent of the air made me dizzy. He stopped in front of a small box numbered 317. "Your mother's," he said. When the box slid open, I expected stacks of bills, maybe jewelry, something material. Instead, it contained only a few items: a birth certificate, a stack of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon, and a small envelope labeled "To my daughter, when she's ready." I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I sat there staring at it, afraid to open it. Something told me that what lay inside would change not just my life, but everything I thought I knew about who I was. I finally broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The first line read, "My dearest child, if you are reading this, it means the truth has finally found its way back to you." I unfolded the letter slowly, afraid that even the sound of paper tearing might shatter my heart. My mother's handwriting was graceful, steady, as if she'd written it with tears in her eyes, but resolve in her soul. The words began gently, like a lullaby. "My daughter, there are truths a mother hides not out of shame, but out of love." I could almost hear her voice, that same tender tone she used to calm me when I was a child. She wrote about the years of hardship after my supposed father's death, how survival had pushed her into difficult choices. Then, the name appeared again, Mr. A. She confessed he wasn't just a benefactor or a friend. He was my biological father, a powerful banker, married, influential, and terrified of scandal. My mother had agreed to keep his name secret in exchange for financial security that she swore never to use unless absolutely necessary. She explained that every month he had deposited money into a secret account under her name, money she never touched because she feared what it represented. "I wanted you to live clean," she wrote, "to grow from effort, not from shame. But I couldn't bear the thought of you struggling forever. That's why I left this for you, so the burden I carried could become your freedom." By the time I finished reading, my tears had soaked through the paper. I felt betrayed, broken, and loved all at once. My life had been built on the idea that we were poor but honest, and now, that illusion had crumbled like dust in my hands. I sat in that sterile bank room, surrounded by money and lies, realizing that I didn't even know my own name anymore. The last line was written in shaky ink, as if her hand had trembled with the weight of truth. "He wanted to meet you before he died. His real name is Henry Dalton." I repeated his name out loud. Henry Dalton. It felt foreign in my mouth, yet something in my chest recognized it. I'd seen that name before, though I couldn't remember where. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of the clock ticking felt louder than ever, echoing in the hollow silence of the house. My thoughts kept circling back to the same question: who was this man, and why did he abandon us? By morning, curiosity had turned into determination. I opened the old wooden drawer where I kept my bills and found my mother's photo albums. I flipped through them, searching for clues. On the last page, tucked behind a picture of her holding me as a baby, there was a small newspaper clipping, an obituary dated 10 years earlier. The name printed in bold letters froze me in place. Henry Dalton, founder of St. Mary's Bank, survived by his wife Eleanor and 2 sons. My hands began to tremble. He had died a decade ago, the same year my mother had fallen ill. Could she have known? Was her sickness what finally made her write that letter? My mind raced as I realized something even more chilling. I had walked past his portrait every time I entered the bank. The man in the photo on the wall, honored for his service to the community, he was my father. I felt anger rise in me like a storm. He had built an empire while we lived counting pennies. My mother's silence, once a mystery of love, now felt like a betrayal. Why hadn't she fought for me to be acknowledged? Why had she let me believe I was born into poverty when my blood carried the name of a wealthy man? Still, there was one line in the obituary that caught my attention, one that whispered opportunity through the pain. Private estate held in trust for family review. I didn't know exactly what it meant, but deep down, I knew this wasn't over. I needed to see where he had lived. I needed to face what had been hidden from me all my life. The Dalton mansion stood like a monument to arrogance, tall iron gates, marble statues, and walls that had seen more wealth than compassion. I had only seen houses like that in magazines, the kind my mother used to glance at and say, "Money doesn't buy peace." But as I stood there, clutching her letter, I felt nothing but bitterness. Peace might not come from money, but comfort surely did, and comfort was something we'd never had. The security guard at the entrance looked me up and down, his eyes skeptical. My clothes were old, my shoes worn. I didn't belong there, and we both knew it. "I'm here to speak with the Dalton family," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He hesitated before calling someone inside. A few moments later, a woman's voice answered through the intercom, sharp, impatient. "Who is it?" "My name is Margaret," I said softly, using my mother's name instead of mine. Something told me it was safer that way. After a long pause, the gates opened with a metallic groan. I walked through the garden, my heart pounding, every step echoing against the silence of luxury. A woman in her 50s greeted me at the door. Elegant, poised, but her eyes carried the weight of someone who had lived too long in the shadow of a man's reputation. "I'm Eleanor Dalton," she said, the widow. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I wanted to scream, to tell her who I was, but the words caught in my throat like glass. "I came about something your husband left behind," I managed to say. Her expression changed, curiosity mixed with suspicion. "Come in," she replied coldly. As she led me through the grand hallway, I saw the portraits on the walls. Henry Dalton, proud and distant, staring down at me as if he could still command the room. My hands clenched. I was finally face to face with the world that had stolen my birthright. Eleanor Dalton led me into a living room that looked more like a museum than a home. Everything was polished, untouched, a place where nothing ever changed, because change would mean admitting time had passed. She gestured for me to sit, her eyes never leaving mine. "You said you're here about my husband," she said, her voice calm but guarded. "What exactly is this about?" I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. Before he passed, Henry Dalton had certain financial matters connected to my mother. Her eyebrows lifted slightly, the kind of reaction that reveals curiosity hiding behind pride. "Your mother?" she repeated, her tone sharpening like a blade. "And what was her name?" "Margaret Hale," I said quietly. For a moment, I saw something flicker in her gaze, recognition, quickly buried under cold composure. She looked away, pretending to pour tea, but her hands trembled just enough for me to notice. "Yes," she said softly, "I remember her." The air in the room grew heavy. My husband was generous with people, too generous sometimes. The way she said it, clipped, controlled, told me she knew far more than she wanted to admit. "Did he ever mention me?" I asked, unable to stop the question. Eleanor froze, her eyes locking on mine. For the first time, she really looked at me, not as an intruder, but as something hauntingly familiar. She studied my face, her lips parting slightly. "You have his eyes," she whispered, almost to herself. Then, realizing what she'd said, she straightened up. "I don't know what you're insinuating," she snapped. "But whatever business your mother had with my husband, it ended decades ago." I felt anger rising inside me, but I forced a calm smile. "Maybe so," I said. "But sometimes the past doesn't end just because someone dies." I followed Eleanor's gaze as it drifted toward the large portrait above the fireplace, Henry Dalton, captured in oil and arrogance, staring down at us like a ghost who still ruled the room. The firelight flickered across his painted face, making it almost lifelike. His expression was calm, almost smug, as if he knew this confrontation would one day happen. Eleanor sipped her tea in silence, but I could feel her discomfort. "He had that portrait commissioned the same year your mother worked at the bank," she said suddenly, her voice cold but shaking slightly. "He said it was to mark a turning point in his life." She didn't look at me when she said it, and that told me everything. Something about the painting drew me closer. The frame was thick and ornate, but uneven near the bottom corner, as if it had been removed and reattached at some point. My curiosity burned. "It's a beautiful piece," I murmured, stepping closer. Eleanor stood abruptly. "Please don't touch that," she said sharply. But I already had. My fingers brushed the edge of the frame, and I felt something, a small ridge, a hidden latch. I pressed it gently, and with a faint click, a narrow slit opened behind the painting. A small envelope slid out and fell to the floor, yellowed with age. I picked it up before she could stop me. Her eyes widened, and her face turned pale. "You shouldn't have found that," she whispered. The envelope was sealed with red wax, the kind used decades ago. Written across the front in elegant handwriting was a name, To my daughter. For a moment, the world went silent. Even the ticking clock seemed to stop. Eleanor covered her mouth with one trembling hand. He said he destroyed it, she murmured, more to herself than to me. I looked at her, heart pounding. Looks like he didn't. My fingers trembled as I broke the red wax seal. The sound of the paper tearing seemed to echo through the vast, silent room. Eleanor sat frozen on the sofa, her eyes fixed on the letter as if it were a ghost. Inside, the pages were delicate and slightly stained, as if someone had held them with tears. I took a deep breath and began to read. To my daughter, it began. The words felt unreal, impossible, yet they pierced through me with painful clarity. You do not know my name, and that is my greatest shame. I have watched you grow from afar, always hidden behind the walls I built to protect my reputation and destroy my soul. My vision blurred as tears filled my eyes. He had known about me all along. He spoke of my mother, how he had loved her deeply, how fear had made him a coward. I built a life of marble and gold, he wrote, but not one day passed that I didn't think of the home I abandoned and the child who bore my eyes. Eleanor turned her face away, but I could see the shimmer of tears. She knew these words were true. Then came the part that broke me. Everything I have built was never meant for the world that knew me. It was meant for you. The account your mother holds is but a fraction. The rest lies in trust, hidden under her name, to be claimed only when truth meets courage. My hands shook so hard that the paper rustled. He had left her, us, more than money. He had left a secret fortune, disguised under my mother's identity. At the bottom, in his fading signature, were 4 words that felt like a prayer and a confession. Forgive me, my child. When I looked up, Eleanor was weeping quietly. He never told me, she whispered. Not once. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, there was no pride in them, only sorrow. We were 2 women bound by the same man's cowardice, and the same wound that time could never heal. After leaving the Dalton mansion, I felt as if the world had tilted. The letter burned inside my purse like a living thing, whispering a truth too heavy to carry. My mother's silence, Henry's guilt, Eleanor's pain, all of it had been woven into a tapestry of lies disguised as love. I needed answers, but more than that, I needed closure. There was only one place left to look: the bank. The next morning, I returned to St. Mary's. The same elderly banker greeted me, his eyes widening slightly when I handed him the second letter. He read it in silence, then looked at me with something between awe and disbelief. Your father, he was a complicated man, he said. He didn't just leave you money. He left you a legacy he didn't trust anyone else to hold. He disappeared into the archives and returned carrying a thick folder marked Confidential, Hale Trust. My breath caught when I saw my mother's maiden name printed on it. Inside were documents, signatures, and transfer orders dating back over 40 years. The banker's voice was calm, reverent almost. This trust holds several accounts, all under your mother's management. The funds have grown over the decades. As of now, you are the sole heir. The numbers blurred before my eyes. It wasn't just a small fortune. It was wealth beyond anything I'd ever imagined. Enough to change my life completely. I felt dizzy, as if the room were spinning. All those years of struggle, of counting pennies, of going to bed hungry, and all this time, the key to freedom had been hidden in silence. But as I looked at the papers, I felt no joy, only confusion and guilt. How could I accept something born from betrayal? How could I live in peace, knowing my mother suffered, so I could have this? The banker placed a hand gently on the folder. Your mother never wanted this to destroy you, he said. She wanted it to set you free. I stared at the folder for a long moment, then whispered, then maybe it's time I decide what freedom really means. I walked home with the folder pressed against my chest, the papers inside whispering temptations I didn't want to hear. Every step echoed louder than my thoughts. I could feel my mother's spirit walking beside me, silent but present, as if waiting to see what I would do. When I finally reached the house, I placed the folder on the kitchen table, the same table where she used to count coins to buy bread. The contrast made my heart ache. I sat there for hours, staring at the numbers that no longer felt real. I had gone from counting cents to owning a fortune. But what did it mean? Could money ever repair a lifetime of silence, shame, and hidden truths? I poured myself a cup of cold coffee and stared out the window, the same window where I had once cried over unpaid bills. I whispered, "Mama, is this what you wanted for me?" Part of me wanted to reject it all, to burn the documents and walk away. I didn't want my happiness to be built on another family's secret, on a man's cowardice. But another part of me, the tired, broken part, whispered back, "You deserve peace." I thought of all the nights my mother went hungry so I could eat, all the years she worked double shifts just to keep me clothed. Maybe this wasn't blood money. Maybe it was her way of giving me the life she never could. I opened the notebook she had left me, the one from 1968, and ran my fingers over her handwriting. She had known I would face this moment. In her final entry, she had written, "When the truth finds you, don't run from it, heal it." I realized then that accepting the inheritance wasn't about greed. It was about closure, about taking what was buried in pain and turning it into purpose. So I took a deep breath, signed the acceptance form, and whispered to the empty room, "I forgive you both." And for the first time in my life, the house felt lighter, as if the ghosts had finally let go. For weeks, I lived in a strange stillness. The money was there, sitting quietly in a bank account under my name, but I couldn't bring myself to touch it. The house was the same. The air still smelled of old coffee and dust, yet everything felt different. The silence had changed. It was no longer the silence of poverty. It was the silence of reflection. The kind that forces you to listen to the echo of your own choices. I spent days walking through the rooms, touching the walls, remembering the sacrifices my mother made. Every crack, every faded corner carried her story. She had endured loneliness, so I could stand here now, free from hunger but heavy with questions. I realized then that true inheritance isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in the weight of the truths we're brave enough to carry. One afternoon, I sat by the window with her photograph in my hands. "You could have told me," I whispered. "You didn't have to bear it alone." For a moment, I swear I felt her presence, gentle, forgiving. The wind outside brushed the curtain softly, like a caress. I closed my eyes, and in that stillness, I understood. She hadn't kept the secret to punish me. She had kept it to protect me. The silence between us was no longer empty. It was sacred. It spoke of love, regret, and forgiveness. That night, I wrote a letter of my own, addressed not to the past, but to the future. "If anyone ever finds this," I wrote, "know that forgiveness is the greatest form of wealth. And truth, once revealed, can heal generations." It was a gray morning when I heard the knock on my door. 3 sharp knocks, confident, deliberate, nothing like the soft tapping of a neighbor. I hesitated before opening it, a strange heaviness pressing on my chest. When I did, I found a tall man standing on my porch. His suit was expensive, but his expression was colder than the wind. "You must be Margaret Hale's daughter," he said. "My name is Edward Dalton." The name struck me like a thunderclap. Henry Dalton's eldest son. My half-brother. I froze, gripping the doorframe for balance. "May I come in?" he asked, though it sounded more like a demand than a question. I nodded silently. He stepped inside, his eyes scanning the modest furniture, the old walls, the life of simplicity that contrasted so sharply with his world. "You've been busy," he said, glancing at the papers on the table, the trust documents I hadn't yet filed away. I felt my throat tighten. "You know about the trust," I said quietly. He smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. "Oh, we know everything," he replied. "My mother found your visit unsettling. She asked me to look into it." His tone dripped with suspicion. I tried to stay calm. "Then you also know the truth," I said. "Your father—" "My father," he interrupted harshly, "made mistakes. But he also protected what was his. And I won't let anyone, any stranger, tear that apart." His voice trembled with anger, or maybe fear. I couldn't tell. For a moment, I saw a flash of pain behind his arrogance, the pain of a man realizing his perfect world had a crack in it. "I'm not here to take anything from you," I said softly. "I'm just trying to understand where I came from." He looked at me then, really looked, and for a brief second I saw the same blue eyes I saw in the mirror every morning. "You're not one of us," he whispered. Then, turning away, he added, "But you should have been." And just like that, he left, leaving the door wide open, and my heart even more so. The following week felt like a storm gathering over my quiet life. Letters began arriving, not from the bank, but from lawyers. Cold, printed words filled with accusations, unauthorized claim, disputed inheritance, illegitimate heir. Edward Dalton had done exactly what I feared. He was contesting everything. He wanted to erase me again, just like his father once had. I sat in silence, the papers spread before me, my mother's handwriting beside them like a fragile shield against the cruelty of the world. I could almost hear her voice whispering, "They took everything from me once. Don't let them take it from you." My hands shook as I picked up the phone and called the banker, Mr. Harris. His tone was firm, but kind. "You have every legal right to this inheritance," he said. "Henry Dalton's confession letter is undeniable proof. But this will be ugly." Ugly was an understatement. Within days, journalists began calling. Headlines surfaced. Banker's hidden daughter emerges after decades. The story spread like wildfire. Neighbors stared. Strangers whispered. I wasn't just the poor woman from the corner anymore. I was a scandal. And every night, as I tried to sleep, I could hear my mother's sewing machine in my mind, that rhythmic sound she used to drown her pain in silence. Edward sent one last letter, handwritten this time. "You could have stayed quiet," it said. "You could have respected what's ours. Now everyone knows." For a moment I wanted to give up. But then I thought of my mother, of her trembling hands hiding the key, of her choosing dignity over wealth. I couldn't let her sacrifice be buried by shame again. So I wrote back, just one sentence. "The truth belongs to no one. It only waits for courage." The courthouse smelled of fear and old wood, that mix of sweat, dust, and quiet judgment. I sat alone at the plaintiff's table, my hands trembling, the letter from Henry Dalton folded neatly inside my purse like a secret weapon. Across the room sat Edward and his mother, elegant and composed, their faces unreadable. The whispers from the audience buzzed like flies around guilt. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that I wasn't there for revenge. I was there for truth. When the judge entered, silence filled the room. The sound of the gavel echoed like thunder. "Case number 14-23, he announced. "Dalton family versus Margaret Hale." My stomach twisted. Edward's lawyer began, his tone sharp, rehearsed. He painted me as a fraud, a manipulator who had exploited an old man's reputation for financial gain. Every word cut like glass. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. My mother's voice inside me said, "Dignity is the sharpest sword." Then my lawyer, a calm older woman with eyes that burned like truth, stood and placed the two letters on the table. "Your Honor," she said, "these are not stories. They are confessions, one written by Henry Dalton himself, the other by the woman who carried his secret alone for 40 years. The courtroom murmured. The judge leaned forward, his brows knitting together. She read the final lines aloud. "Forgive me, my child. The fortune I built was never meant to hide. It was meant to heal." For a moment, even Edward looked away. The silence that followed was thick, sacred. The judge tapped his pen, eyes thoughtful. "The DNA test confirms it," he said finally. "She is, without question, Henry Dalton's biological daughter. The trust is hers by law and by truth." Eleanor lowered her gaze, tears glistening. Edward's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The gavel fell. Case dismissed. I exhaled a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. I hadn't just won money. I had won back my mother's name, her dignity. And for the first time in my life, I walked out of a room not as a ghost, but as someone finally seen. The morning after the verdict, I woke to a silence that felt different, lighter, like a burden had finally dissolved into air. The sky was gray, but it wasn't sad. It was soft, like the calm after a storm. I dressed simply, carrying only two things with me: my mother's old notebook and Henry Dalton's letter. My steps led me, almost by instinct, to the small cemetery on the edge of town, where two lives, once separated by shame, now rested under the same sky. The earth was damp from last night's rain, and the scent of wet grass filled the air. My mother's grave was modest, marked only by a worn stone and a name carved with love. Beside it, a few rows away, stood the marble monument of Henry Dalton, grand, cold, and untouched by time. Two worlds divided even in death. I knelt between them, the letters trembling in my hands. "You both hid the truth," I whispered. "But it still found me." For a long moment, I said nothing more. I just let the wind speak. It rustled through the trees, lifting the edges of the papers like gentle fingers. I placed my mother's notebook on her grave, pressing it softly into the soil. "You don't have to carry it anymore," I said. Then I walked to Henry's grave and laid his letter there. "And you," I whispered, "don't have to hide anymore." The clouds parted slightly, letting a beam of sunlight fall across both tombstones. It was almost poetic, as if the universe itself wanted to say enough. My tears came, not from pain, but from peace. I had spent my whole life feeling poor, not because of money, but because I thought I came from nothing. Now I understood that I came from love, flawed but real. I stood up, wiped my face, and smiled faintly. "I forgive you both," I said one last time, "and I'll live the rest of my days in truth." The wind grew still, and in that silence, I swear I felt them both there, not haunting me, but finally letting me go. Months passed, and the storm of headlines slowly faded. The Dalton name still carried weight in town, but now it carried a different story, one of truth reclaimed. The inheritance had been transferred to my name, but I couldn't spend a single dollar on myself. Every time I tried, I saw my mother's hands, cracked from work, trembling from exhaustion, and I knew that this money wasn't meant for luxury. It was meant for something pure, something that healed. So I founded the Margaret Hale Foundation, in her name, not mine. Its mission was simple: to help women who carried their own silent battles, single mothers, widows, those abandoned by love and circumstance. I wanted them to know that silence doesn't have to mean surrender, that even in the quietest lives, there is strength. The first donation came from me, but soon others followed, even people I never expected. One afternoon, as I was organizing papers in the office, a letter arrived with no return address. Inside was a simple note that read, "For what it's worth, he would have been proud." It wasn't signed, but I knew the handwriting, Eleanor's. For the first time, I smiled without bitterness. We had both lost the same man, but in different ways. Now, in our own ways, we were both free. The foundation grew slowly, humbly, like the flowers my mother used to plant behind the house. Women came with stories of pain and left with hope. And every time one of them smiled again, I felt a piece of her, my mother, smiling through them. One evening, as the sun set over the quiet town, I whispered to her memory, "You turned secrets into seeds, Mama, and they're blooming everywhere." It's been years since that day in the courtroom, but sometimes I still wake up hearing my mother's voice, soft, distant, like wind brushing against old curtains. Life has changed in ways I never imagined. The house is brighter now, filled with laughter from the women who come here for help, for guidance, for peace. I've aged, of course, but not with regret, with grace. Because for the first time, I know who I am, not the poor girl, not the secret daughter, but the bridge between truth and forgiveness. Every night before I go to bed, I write a little in my journal. One evening, I found myself beginning a new page with words that felt strangely familiar. "If you're reading this," I smiled. It was how my mother's letter had begun. I realized then that I was writing my own, not out of guilt, but out of gratitude. My words weren't meant to hide the past, but to illuminate it. I wrote about her strength, his remorse, and the quiet courage it takes to face the truth. about how love, even when broken, still has the power to heal what shame once destroyed. I wrote for those who will come after, those who think they're alone, those who believe they were born from nothing. I wanted them to know that silence can bloom into wisdom if we dare to listen. When I finished, I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside the same sewing box where everything began. I closed the lid, feeling peace settle in my chest like a warm light. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel poor. I felt whole. And if one day someone finds this box, maybe a daughter, maybe a stranger, I hope she smiles and understands what I finally learned. Some inherit money, others inherit silence, but the luckiest ones inherit truth.